Hello, everyone. Welcome. In today's episode, we will see a young man decided to quit school to work as a taxi driver and support his family. One morning, Youngmin begins cleaning the car he uses and finds a mysterious phone. He assumes one of his clients lost it, but when he tries to turn it on, the phone releases a wave of energy that actually shocks him. Youngmin drops the phone but picks it up again, full of curiosity. At that moment, a man approaches him and reveals that he is a bank representative. He informs Youngmin that his parents owed the bank 300 million won. The boy must pay the first 30 million won this month, or the bank will seize their house. The boy starts his shift that night with the intention of working every day this month to gather the money. His first passengers are some actresses in white dresses and strange makeup. The actresses want to go to the cemetery for a film shoot. After he gives them a ride, another girl in a white dress appears in the taxi. Youngmin believes she is a friend of the actresses. The girl steps out of the taxi, passing by him. As she walks a little further, the girl is pulled back into the taxi and floats inside. Youngmin is so scared that he faints. The girl steps out of the car again and wonders if she is dead. The girl has no idea who she is or how she died. Youngmin wakes up the next morning, but the girl is still in the taxi. The boy runs away while Jean follows him, but she is pulled back into the car. Youngmin is afraid to return to the car. When a traffic officer appears, the boy politely asks him to check if there is someone in the taxi. As the officer doesn't see anyone, Youngmin goes back inside only to see the ghost again. The two have a brief conversation. Jean asks the boy if he killed her with his taxi, and that's why she is stuck there. In fact, she found a bit of blood in the back seat. However, Youngmin proves to her that the blood is fake and was spilled by the actresses the previous night. The boy wants to get rid of the girl, but she cannot go far. Apparently, there is a limit, and she always floats back to the car. Whatever the case, Youngmin still needs to make money. He gets back to work, but there is a problem. His customers feel sick in the ghost's presence and don't want to ride with him. The cute ghost convinces Youngmin to help her. So, he sketches her and goes to the nearest police station, asking if they know a girl like the one in the drawing who was involved in a car accident. When Youngmin tells the officer that the girl might be between 20 and 40 years old, Jean tries to look at herself in the mirror but has no reflection, as she is a ghost. Elsewhere, some homicide detectives are working on a case involving Jean. Later that night, Youngmin parks the taxi far from his house to ensure the ghost cannot follow him. His grandmother, Bumja, is already waiting for him, and the boy runs straight into her arms after the strange experience he had today. While sleeping, Youngmin has a strange dream of seeing Jean floating above him. He screams in fear, but his grandmother wakes him, and he realizes it's already morning. Bumja wants him to give her a ride, and Youngmin convinces her to sit in the back seat. Suddenly, Bumja begins to feel unwell. Jean also speaks to Youngmin, which causes him to lose focus and drive the car straight into the trash. After dropping off his grandmother, Youngmin takes the car to a temple where two priestesses perform a ritual to cleanse the vehicle of any malevolent energy. However, the ghost is still there. That night, Youngmin picks up Dr. Du in his taxi and drives him to the hospital. The doctor doesn't suffer any adverse effects in the ghost's presence. At the hospital, Youngmin remembers how the doctor tried to save his mother's life when she was in an accident. The boy even treats Du to some juice to show how grateful he is for his help. Back home, the boy visits a forum to ask about ghosts. A user named Flower Median replies, telling him that the gates are open and ghosts are flowing into their world. The next day, Youngmin returns to work. At some point, he sees a man signaling for him to stop. Surprisingly, this man can see Jean. Youngmin takes the ghost to an isolated place to talk to him. Jean argues with another ghost, Be on Call, saying she found Youngmin first. Youngmin decides to take him for the time being, but when he tries to pick up a real human, the man cannot even get into the taxi because his body starts to hurt. That night, Youngmin looks at a picture of his late mother, wondering what he should do. The next day, he plans to sell his taxi and buy a new car. But that changes when a third ghost appears and tells Jean he has some gold jewelry in the back of his old car. The ghost needs help delivering the jewelry to his daughter and wife. Youngmin helps with this, and the man achieves catharsis, moving from this world to the next. As he does, his daughter gives Youngmin a gold ring as a reward for letting her see her father one last time. Back in the taxi, Jean asks if they can help him too. He can actually pay because he has some pure gold hidden in the house where he used to live. He can guide Youngmin to find it and keep it. Jean has an idea, suggesting they could turn the taxi into a service for ghosts. If the ghosts can pay in some way, they can grant their wishes and help them move on to the next world. Youngmin thinks it's worth trying. Beyond Call starts narrating how he died in a work accident 1 month after marrying the love of his life. Youngmin takes him back to his home, where Beyond Call explains that he had promised his wife to install a bathtub for her, but never got the chance to do it. When Youngmin sees Call's wife walking by, he changes his mind. He declares that this is a terrible idea and leaves with Jean. That night, the two begin arguing about what to do, but are interrupted by Bumja, Youngmin's grandmother, complaining that the sink is leaking again. The boy starts fixing it. As he works, he recalls memories of his mother. Meanwhile, Jean wanders around the house and looks at the photos of Youngmin with his family. She feels awful because everyone has a story while she has no memories of her past. Considering his happy memories, Youngmin changes his mind and decides to help Beyond Call. When he drives back to his house with Jean, the ghost begins telling the story of his relationship with his wife. They met while working at a cafe 8 years ago and became very close from that day on. The best way to enter the house is for Youngmin to pretend he's Beyond Call's cousin. The ghost provides all the necessary information to make his performance convincing. Youngmin knocks on Yant's door and pretends that his cousin told him about the plan to install a bathtub in her house. Out of respect for Beyond Call's memory, Youngmin wants to do the job and install the bathtub. Once inside the house, Youngmin asks Yan for some papers to distract her. Jean goes with her while Beyond Call leads the boy to another room to search for the gold. After some unsuccessful attempts, they finally find the gold hidden in the air conditioning system. Jean begins shouting to inform them that Yan is coming back to the living room, but Youngmin is already there. While they're talking, Yan receives a call from Beyond Call's workplace, and Youngmin offers to give her a ride. At the same time, Youngmin's grandmother is visited by two detectives, Jae-cha and Tan, who ask her who drove the taxi back home on the night the boy's mother died. The grandmother doesn't know the answer and calls Youngmin. Surprisingly, the boy says it wasn't him who drove the taxi that night. They have to hang up when a lawyer from Beyond Call's former company arrives. While the lawyer starts talking to Yan, two elderly people appear, claiming to be Beyond Call's parents. The ghost doesn't recognize them because his mother abandoned him as a child. However, the woman shows some papers to the lawyer, proving they are indeed his parents. When Jean has a private conversation with the woman, she hands her a bank book. The woman claims she opened a bank account for her son when he was a child to deposit money for him. However, she later mentions that Beyond Call loved apricots, while the ghost reveals he was allergic to apricots. Additionally, the woman finds out that Beyond Call never published his marriage certificate, a piece of information she uses to claim compensation from his company for his death. Jean is naturally angry with her, but the woman promises to share a significant portion of the compensation later. While they are in the car, it's revealed that the elderly couple is actually a pair of scammers. The woman confesses she spent time with Beyond Call's real mother in prison, where she learned about him. Elsewhere, Youngmin drops Jean off at home and then drives back to his own house. The boy suspects something is wrong with the supposed parents of Beyond Call and cites the example of the apricots. A real mother would never overlook something as crucial as a food allergy because a mother's priority is keeping her children safe. The next morning, Youngmin and Jean find the house where Call's real mother used to live. The boy guesses the doors are unlocked because it's Call's birthday and enters the house. He realizes he was right when he finds a photo of Call's real mother with the scammer. When he shows the picture to Call, the ghost remembers when his mother left him at the orphanage. He looked at her hand and recalls she had a mark on her right hand. Youngmin meets with Yan again to inform her about his suspicions. The next step is to meet the lawyer again and prove that the scammer is not Call's real mother. Indeed, Youngmin arranges the meeting, and the lawyer asks the woman to provide her fingerprint. Reluctant, the woman hesitates to show her right hand, but Youngmin removes the glove she is wearing. However, this is not enough to convince the lawyer, who takes her fingerprint. The lawyer comments that her fingerprint is faded, but the woman explains she worked tough jobs all her life, causing the wear. The woman pretends to be insulted by everyone's mistrust and removes a strand of hair from her head, suggesting they perform a DNA test. However, she also knows they have nothing to compare her DNA with since Call is now dead. Jean faints and is taken to the hospital, where Dr. Du informs her that she is 3 months pregnant. When they meet the scammer woman again in the hallway, Youngmin tells her she made a mistake. The group manages to perform the DNA test by comparing the woman's hair with the baby's. When the lawyer summons the elderly couple back, Youngmin presents evidence that the woman is not Beyond Call's mother. Surprised, the woman asks how they managed this, and Youngmin reveals that he returned to the office after everyone had left to retrieve a strand of her hair. With no other way to claim the money, the scammers flee, weaving through the hospital corridors. Youngmin tries to chase them but loses them. Outside the hospital, the issue with the money is resolved, and Yeon can finally claim it. Later, Youngmin shares a private moment with Jean, who is proud of him. The two feel a growing attraction, and Jean suggests they at least give each other a high five. When they try, Jean floats through Youngmin and stumbles. He tries to extend his hand to help her up, knowing he can't touch her. At that moment, he notices Jean is wearing a bracelet that belonged to his mother. However, Jean has no idea how she came to have the bracelet. Before they can discuss it further, Yeon arrives to thank Youngmin for everything he did to help her. The taxi driver takes her back home but notices she left Call's old bank books in the car. Inside the house, Yeon is struggling with the scammers, who returned seeking revenge. Call runs out to warn Youngmin about the situation. The boy rushes to Yeon's apartment but finds the door locked. He begs the criminals not to hurt Yeon, pointing out that her baby would also be harmed. The scammers threaten Yeon with a knife, making Call increasingly desperate. Although he is just a ghost, Call tries to weaken the lock so Youngmin can enter. Eventually, he manages to break the lock enough for Youngmin to get in. Youngmin stops the criminals from harming Yeon, and the police arrive to arrest them, allowing Yeon to return to her former life. Before leaving, Youngmin tells Yeon that Beyond Call is there as a ghost. Call then communicates with Yeon, delivering his final words. Yeon is deeply moved, realizing it must truly be her husband since there was no way Youngmin could know certain details. After his farewell, Beyond Call is finally free to cross to the other side. Back at home, Youngmin starts searching for the bracelet he gave to his mother, which he considers very special. His grandmother sees him going through his mother's belongings and asks why. Youngmin explains that the bracelet is unique, with many small details he added, and holds great sentimental value. Bunja takes her phone and shows Youngmin some old photos of his mother wearing the bracelet. However, one of the pictures stands out. It shows his mother in a selfie with Jean, indicating that the two women knew each other. When Youngmin is alone with Jean, he asks her again about the bracelet. Unfortunately, the ghost has no memory of it, but suggests they investigate the lead, believing it might uncover more information about her past. The next day, while driving his taxi, Youngmin receives a call from the two detectives investigating his mother's case. They reveal they've discovered she was hit and abandoned by a motorcycle on the road. Youngmin meets the detectives at a cafe, but complains about the cold due to the air conditioning, suggesting they sit outside so Jean can enjoy the coffee's aroma. Detective J. Sheeny asks Youngmin what exactly happened that night and why he didn't drive his mother's taxi. A flashback shows the events of that night from Youngmin's perspective. He was on the phone with his mother, making dinner plans, when he heard strange noises before the call abruptly ended. He ran to find her, seeing Dr. Du trying to save her until the ambulance arrived. Youngmin couldn't get into the ambulance due to lack of space. He considered driving his mother's taxi to the hospital but decided to leave the scene intact for the police investigation. In the present, Youngmin tells the detectives he's frustrated with them, arguing they should stop wasting time with silly questions and focus on finding the person responsible for the hit and run. Shortly after, Youngmin and Jean visit his mother's resting place, looking for anything that might serve as a clue. During their visit, a strange man secretly takes pictures of them from a distance. Meanwhile, Bunja, concerned about her grandson's personal life, decides to call Sori, a young nurse who works at the same hospital as Dr. Du. Bunja invites Sori to have a drink with her and Youngmin, but the nurse is busy. At the hospital, a gravely injured man is brought into the emergency room. Dr. Du initially stabilizes the patient, but when the situation worsens, he rushes back to try and revive him. Unfortunately, the man doesn't survive, and Dr. Du has to inform his family. Later, Youngmin picks up an unusual passenger, a young man whose eyes glow blue and who can see Jean. The man, revealed to be a medium called the Florist, tries to place a spell on Jean using a yellow paper to banish her, but Youngmin intervenes. The medium warns Youngmin that he's meddling with something dangerous and should stay away from ghosts. Before leaving, the medium gives Youngmin his card. Shortly after, Youngmin and Jean discover her ghost isn't bound to the car but to a phone. The young driver takes the phone with him, and the ghost is drawn to it, being projected closer to Youngmin. Although they can't stop thinking about each other, the phone's battery dies, causing the ghost to disappear. Youngmin tries to buy a charger, but can't find one immediately. He gets distracted with various passengers entering his taxi, and the night turns out to be quite profitable. Meanwhile, Jean is trapped in a dark place that resembles a type of underworld. The next morning, Youngmin gives his grandmother a ride, and she notices the broken phone in the car. Youngmin explains that it's not working, so his grandmother grabs it and tosses it into the recycling bin. He tries to stop her, but is too late. Still, Youngmin considers that maybe it's time to move on with his life as a normal person. As the day progresses, however, everything reminds him of Jean, his ghostly crush. In the underworld, Jean sees a woman holding a baby, but the figure quickly vanishes. Back in the real world, Youngmin retrieves the phone from the recycling bin and buys a charger. Once home, he plugs in the charger, and the phone begins to work, allowing Jean to return, literally falling into Youngmin's arms. Though they know a relationship between them wouldn't work, the mutual attraction is undeniable. For now, they decide to continue working together on their ghost business, helping spirits fulfill their wishes and achieve closure. One night, Youngmin picks up a ghost who has no money to pay for the ride. The ghost tries to escape, but Jean catches him. Without money, the ghost introduces them to another spirit who claims to be able to help with their business. This second ghost takes them to a bus station, explaining that many ghosts gather there during the day, meaning Youngmin could find numerous potential clients and charge for his services. The next day, Jean is thrilled by the idea, and they find several ghosts forming a line at the bus station. Jean talks to some of them to learn about their wishes until a ghost of a young man wearing glasses approaches. He introduces himself as Sinan, a former college friend of Jean, and reveals her real name. He also mentions that Jean was very cheerful in college. Sinan takes them to a store that used to belong to him and shows them an old photo of himself with Jean. In the image, Jean recognizes the woman she saw in the underworld holding a baby. Sinan reveals that this woman was Jin's best friend. Then, Sinan helps Youngmin open a safe, where they find a significant amount of money. Sinan asks Youngmin to use the money to help him fulfill his bucket list, enabling him to transition to the next world. Youngmin takes Jean to her old school, where they discover she was a martial arts champion. Later, the driver visits the medium again, buying a mirror capable of reflecting ghosts and asking if ghosts can change clothes. Back home, Youngmin and Jean try, and Jean finally manages to change clothes. It seems that Sinan is in love with Jean and has a long list of wishes. First, he wants to go shopping with her, then watch a movie, and then dine out with her. However, since it would be strange for Youngmin to date an empty chair, he calls his grandmother to help him eat the things Sinan asked for. Meanwhile, Youngmin becomes jealous. He also learns from Sinan that if two ghosts fall in love, they can move on to the next plane of existence together. The last part of Sinan's plan is to give Jean a ring, so Youngmin proceeds and buys the ring. Confused by everything, Youngmin decides to take some time at a wellness center, but he bumps into a flower medium who informs him that a ghost can transition if love grows in their heart. Meanwhile, the detectives meet with a policeman named Arun, who is also Jin's father. He tells them that, before disappearing, Jean was investigating the case of her best friend. This friend allegedly died at the emergency room, but her daughter believed the woman and her baby had been killed elsewhere. Youngmin spends time with Sinan, but he can't force himself to feel anything for him. Eventually, Youngmin returns home and decides to give Jean a gift from her former classmate. He allows the ghosts to have their moment and tells Jean that she can move on and leave this world. However, Jean doesn't love him, so this transition isn't possible for her. At the same time, Youngmin regrets leaving them alone and runs back to them. When he arrives in the room, he sees Sinan making the transition and fears that Jean will leave forever, but her ghostly passion is still there because she doesn't love Sinan. When they leave, Jean teases Youngmin, saying that he is apparently afraid of losing her. Youngmin pretends that he didn't want her to go because they still have much work to do to figure out what happened to her. Soon, they meet with the medium, hoping to get more information. The medium is about to cast a spell on the phone that Jean is connected to, but Jean fears making the transition. She screams and manages to pull the spell out of the medium's hands. The medium tries hypnosis, and some of Jin's old memories come to light. Jean remembers investigating her best friend's death. She sees that she had cornered a private investigator about some photos he had. When Jean wakes up, she and Youngmin visit the private investigator's office, but the place has been emptied and no one is there. They have to divert their efforts for a while when a child enters their taxi, asking for help. Little John has heard that this taxi grants wishes and wants Youngmin's help to find his sister. The boy can also see Jean, even though he is alive. The team splits up and Jean guides the boy to various stores, asking questions about his missing sister. Meanwhile, Soar witnesses an illegal act when she sees Nurse King Joan stealing some medication from the hospital. She reports it to the detectives who call another nurse, Kinu, to bring some statistics. Upon reviewing the stats, they realize that the death rate increased after King Joan joined the hospital. The doctor sets a trap and records the nurse stealing. Back with Youngmin, he meets a group of girls who knew the boy's missing sister. Youngmin is more interested in talking to Zhao, a girl who worked at the same market as IU. The girl remembers an incident where IU helped her out of trouble, but the rest of the girls don't let her speak. A flashback reveals that this group of girls used to bully IU into stealing cigarettes for them. In the present, Youngmin approaches Zhao and asks her to get into his taxi, which serves as a protected space for her. The leader of the group, Valentin, calls Zhao and tells her not to speak that night. The young people are ambushed by a group of thugs. Valentin paid to have them beaten, and although they get a beating, the detectives arrive just in time to help. After Zhao's hand is treated, Youngmin continues searching for the missing girl. The police find her phone and say that she left a farewell message on it. Jean believes this was done by the people who probably killed the girl. A flashback reveals that she and IU decided to face the bullies. However, the bullies attacked IU and accidentally killed her. They covered her body, and the leader of the bullies threatened everyone to stay silent, or he would kill them too. In the present, Zhao points the right direction for Youngmin, and he goes to search for the girl. At one point, he slips, and Jean manages to grab his hand, holding him. Eventually, they find the girl, who is still alive, and take her to the hospital. At the hospital, the girl's ghost appears to the group and thanks them for finding her. Everyone believes the girl is dead, but when her ghost disappears, her soul truly returns to her body, and she wakes up. Her family thanks the boys, and the girl reconciles with Jean. Another incident happens at the hospital, where Kim Jong is fired and tries to attack Dr. Du, but Sora intervenes. Kim Jong has no choice but to leave. Youngmin and Jean have the opportunity to relax and spend time together. They get closer and start to hope, as Jean was able to materialize for a few seconds and hold his hand the previous night. When they get into the taxi, their faces are very close, but Jean remembers the words of her old classmate, who told her she would be able to move on if she fell in love with Youngmin. Jean realizes that if she falls in love with him, she will disappear. So, she decides to distance herself and keep away from him. Despite this, they decide to follow a local Korean tradition and lock a heart with their names in a special place. While doing this, Jean remembers that she had been treated by this doctor in the past. Youngmin then shows the doctor a photo of Jin's mother and asks if he knows her. The doctor remembers seeing the girl in the past, but sadly informs him that she has passed away. That night, Youngmin does some online research about Jean, but realizes there are no social media accounts with her name. The next morning, Youngmin visits the police station and shows the same photo to the detectives. Initially reluctant, the detectives finally reveal that Jin's mother knew Jean through a program called Copy Taxi, which used some taxis to transfer police officers. This means Jean was a police officer. Meanwhile, the nurse returns to the hospital and attacks Dr. Du. Although he manages to cut Du's arm, King John has to flee when security is called. Youngmin makes another visit to the medium because he wants to ask if it's possible for ghosts to materialize. The flower medium tells him that it's impossible and makes him stop dreaming about spending his life with a ghost. He also warns him that if a ghost loses its way, it transforms into an evil spirit, which is why Youngmin must stay away from ghosts. Meanwhile, the detectives speak with Dr. Du, asking why he believes Kim Jong attacked him. The answer is simple. The doctor says the nurse is disgruntled because Du caught him stealing some medications from the hospital. Before leaving, Kinu also informs them about the high mortality rates the hospital has been seeing recently. Later, Youngmin sees his grandmother working on the road, and he takes her back home. He asks her to quit the program, but his grandmother refuses because they need the money to pay the loan. The next morning, Youngmin takes action and visits the private investigator that Jean had cornered in the past. The driver shows him the photo, but the investigator, Bon, is unwilling to give more details since Youngmin won't pay or hire him. He kicks Youngmin out of the office. When alone, Bon remembers a visit he had from a policeman in the past. The officer asked about one of his clients, who had asked him to take strange photos of people mourning their loved ones. Bon told him at the time that he couldn't reveal his client's details, but the truth is, he had no idea who was paying for the photos. Presently, Youngmin visits Sora at the hospital to ask her how Jean died. The nurse reveals that the girl was brought to the hospital unconscious and was initially stabilized, but her condition suddenly worsened, and she died. When Youngmin returns home, Jean tells him that the case is becoming more complicated and that she probably died while investigating what happened to her best friend. Youngmin takes Jean back to the hospital, where Dr. Du sees the driver talking to himself. After a brief encounter, Youngmin continues to investigate the hospital until the ghost of Kodo appears. Kodo was a police officer who died in the hospital and has been trapped in this world for 5 years. He asks Youngmin for help in exchange for more information about the hospital and Kim Jong, the nurse who was fired. Kodo's wish is to see his daughter one last time. He was always absent from her life, working too much and becoming distant, which caused his daughter to hate him, and they lost all communication. Youngmin agrees to help but cannot find Kodo's daughter. The next morning, he spends some time with Jean to help her materialize again, but this proves to be harder than they thought. Meanwhile, Kodo believes that his former partner, who by coincidence is his own soul, will have some information about his daughter. Youngmin sets up a meeting with him, and as soon as Jean sees him, her heart starts to hurt. The driver asks about this, but the ghost cannot explain this feeling. Anyway, Kodo's soul tells them that the officer helped him in the past, and Kodo just wants his daughter to know what a good person her father truly was. The soul reveals that his daughter lives in the United States, but she is in town for the weekend to give a presentation about future technology. Youngmin finds her and manages to speak with her. He tells her about Kodo's presence, but since she is a scientist, she does not believe in any of it. However, a light string falls as she prepares for her presentation, and Kodo manages to save her before the light hits. Now, she is convinced that her father is present. The group meets her again at Kodo's resting place, and Youngmin delivers his last words to her. The woman forgives her father for being absent from her life, allowing him to transition to the next plane of existence. With this resolved, and with Kim Jong now the main suspect, Youngmin finds his apartment. The ghost of his sister is right outside. When they enter, they discover that Kim Jong's sister, Mian, is dead. Although she cannot remember how she died, she claims that there's no chance her brother killed her. Youngmin finds the photos that the private investigator took for his unknown client, which would normally point to Kim Jong as the culprit behind many deaths. However, Youngmin believes this is too obvious. If he were the killer, he wouldn't have left those photos in his room. Suddenly, Jin's form starts to flicker, and we see that she's not fully dead but is in her own house, being watched over by her father. When she is stabilized, Kinu appears and calls the police on Youngmin but also calls Dr. Du to notify him about Youngmin's presence. A quick flashback reveals that Youngmin has known Kinu since he was a child. His grandfather used to abuse him, but the nurse, who was Youngmin's babysitter at the time, stopped him by threatening to call the police. Youngmin is taken to the police station for a few hours but is soon released since there's no evidence he killed Mian. In fact, she has been dead for over a week. The police also inform him that the motorcycle that hit his mother has been found, but Kim Jong is still free. As they are about to leave the station, Jean sees a photo of herself with her father, which helps her remember more parts of her past. She used to be a police officer and worked in the same department as her father. Youngmin decides to meet with her again, but doesn't tell her that he can see her daughter. He shows her a photo of her mother with Jean and also tells her that her daughter was his friend, so he is very interested in finding out more about her death. The driver also meets with Myung again, who insists that her brother is a good person. She tells them that she used to use drugs, which is why her brother stole the drugs from the hospital. Although it was wrong, he did it for her. Then, Nyan takes them to a large, beautiful house where her brother might be hiding. She reveals that this house belongs to Kim Jong, though she isn't receiving enough money to pay for it. She knows this because her brother used to go fishing with her from time to time. Meanwhile, Youngmin checks if anyone is watching them through the house's cameras. Youngmin shares this new information with Iram So, and they also discover that Kim Jong grew up in an orphanage. Furthermore, the previous owner of that large house was Du's grandfather. Iram takes Youngmin to join the investigation, but he has to leave for a while because one of his friends at the taxi company has lost her mother, who is now revealed to have died under Du's treatment. Du attends the funeral and pretends to feel bad about the woman's death, but June catches him smiling reflexively. When Yob leaves, he manages to see the woman's ghost. He calls his friend to go out, and then tells her everything her mother wants to say. Although his friend is initially skeptical, she becomes convinced that her mother's ghost is present, as Youngmin is talking about details he should know. Meanwhile, the police detectives find Bond dead in his office, but they also find a photo Bond had kept as leverage. The photo is of a motorcycle with the Kdrama emblem. This emblem is given to nurses who graduate from the Kdrama nursing school, and Kim Jong was not one of them. Kim Jong meets with Du, and now the truth is revealed when she warns him that they need to stop because they might get caught. A flashback reveals that Kim Jong eventually killed Du's grandfather because he was abusing the boy. The two lived together, and Du inherited everything that once belonged to his grandfather. Du decides to act and visits Amy's house under the pretense of bringing medicine to BNJ, since she hadn't gone to the hospital to get it. When Yumi goes to get him a drink, Du begins looking around the house, but Jean follows him and warns Youngmin. the driver takes Do, and he decides to play his next card. In Kim Jon's apartment, Youngmin finds a letter asking Kim Jon to notify the author of the letter if he needed help. After some mental games with Kim Jon, and after June has some flashes from the past, Youngmin goes to the hospital and uses a note to compare it with several characters of handwriting. He notices that the letters on the note are in Kim Jon's handwriting style. Do then interacts with Youngmin and asks him about it, but the girl refrains from telling the truth, letting the young driver take a look at her files. Moments later, the police arrive at the hospital with a warrant and ask everyone to cooperate with the investigation. When Do leaves the hospital, he goes to an isolated place and plans to kill Kim Jon, who is tied to the floor. Meanwhile, Jum is about to disappear again but stabilizes once more while doctors tend to her real body, which means she is still alive. Youngmin suggests that they should act quickly and perhaps set a trap for Kim Jon. Youngmin visits her apartment and not only tells her that he knows about the letter she wrote to Kim Jon, but also shows her the photo of the motorcycle, saying he knows that the motorcycle that hit her mother belongs to her. After telling her he will bring her down, Youngmin leaves the apartment, but as soon as he exits the building, he is hit by a bat and falls unconscious. When he wakes up, he is tied to a chair next to Kim Jon's corpse. Do reveals that he is a perverted man, admitting to killing everyone, and tells the young ones that he enjoyed being adored by them for supposedly helping his mother, though in reality, it was he who killed her. Do paid the private investigator to take pictures of people mourning their loved ones because he simply enjoys seeing others suffer. As Do pours gasoline around the young people, a flashback shows everything that happened the day Jum and the driver's mother died. That morning, the young people argued with their mother because she was working long hours to pay off the loan. He then went to college, as he was about to become a police officer too, though he gave it up after his mother's death. His mother, King Jean, took Jum to an event and gave her bracelets so that she could look more friendly. On that day, Jum was investigating Kim Jon because she suspected her and believed she was responsible for the death of her friend. She pretended to be Kim Jon's friend and had some drinks with her in her apartment, but Do knew of her plan and tried to kill her. Jum fought while Do filmed her agony on the phone, which Jum connected to with the phone in her hands. Jum arrived at Kim Jin's taxi, but Do was following behind her. June dropped the phone in the car when she fell unconscious in it. Kim Jin tried to take her away, but she was run over by Kim Yun with the motorcycle. Do tried to finish off Kim Jin, but since there were people around and young men also came, he pretended to help her and killed her later at the hospital. When everyone left the scene, including young men, Kim Yun returned to steal the black box from the car. She got rid of Jum and also abandoned the taxi. Back in the present, Do tries to burn Youngmin alive, but he is saved by the police. A brief flashback shows that Youngmin had installed an app on his phone that allowed her and the others to track his location at home. Jum starts crying because she's devastated by the recent events, but she knows they must continue. Her soul won't rest until Do pays for his crimes. Another flashback shows that Do is responsible for Kolai's death. He altered his prescription to a harmful one that made him dizzy and caused him to suffer a work accident. Do is arrested by the police, but they don't have any reliable evidence that he is guilty. Youngmin tries to arrest him, but he ends up attacking while Do pretends to be the victim in this situation. Youngmin agrees to take the phone to a technician so they can recover the videos on it and use them as evidence, but when they do so, Jum begins to disappear. They then decide to stop the process. That night, Do installs a secret camera in Youngmin's car. Later, the driver finds the ghost of Kim Jon. He remembers that Kim suggested he live in her big house and stay hidden for a while. She also promised to take care of his sister, but she killed Kim Jon. He gets angry, on the verge of becoming an evil spirit, but his sister punishes him and begs him to stay with her. Kim Jon tells Youngmin that he has a secret recording of his conversation with Kim Yun in his parents' old house. Then, he and his sister make the transition. Youngmin finds the recording on Do's secret camera, but since he doesn't know Do's location, he decides to visit Kim Yun with the phone to scare her. He then waits for her to leave the house and follows her. The former nurse takes him directly to Do's location. The two start fighting until Do grabs the phone. Now that he touches it, he can see Jum. Do burns the phone, killing Jum and getting rid of the evidence against him. However, Jum's soul returns to her body while the police arrest Do. Youngmin is disappointed, but her own soul visits her and tells her that her daughter is alive. Someone tried to kill her at the hospital, so he transferred her to his home and hired his own doctors. Her own soul takes Youngmin to the love of her life, and she wakes up when they touch hands. Meanwhile, Do is being interrogated by the detectives, but he is let go when Kim Yun enters the police station, falsely confessing that she is the one who committed all the murders they are blaming Do for. With this action, Do is released while Kim Yun is arrested. That night in prison, Kim Yun decides to commit the unthinkable. Everyone is upset that Do is free, so they come up with a plan. When Do returns to the hospital, only Ril informs that Jae is a patient again because she somehow survived, even though everyone thought she was dead. Do believes he has the chance to finish her off once and for all, but Youngmin intervenes and stops him with the police. Do takes her hostage, and he gets to his car. Do manages to leave, but Youngmin is the one who finally stops him. Even though the doctor managed to escape the police, Do threatens to kill himself, but Youngmin disarms him and says she won't let him die so easily. He has to pay for his crimes. Now that everything falls into place, Youngmin and Kim Yun can finally date for real and share their first kiss. Dr. Do ends up in prison, and on his first night, he is visited by 3 evil spirits who had been waiting to take revenge on him. The next day, Jum shows up for work, but the boss gives her a day off to rest. Youngmin uses this opportunity to go out with her again and introduce her to his friends. Finally, Youngmin finds the ghost of her mother, and the two reconcile. Youngmin apologizes to her for blaming her that morning, and Jean apologizes for being the reason for her death. Kim Yun forgives both of them and wishes them a happy life before making the transition. Finally, the young couple decides to continue working with ghosts. One night, they encounter a female ghost, but Youngmin can't see her because she is now just a normal human. Regardless, the woman says she can pay them by taking them to a bag of money that some gangsters hid in a secret location. With that, the young people start driving.